welcome back. So Vernard, tell us about a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm an artist to begin with. I was raised in Washington, D.C., and have lived between Washington and Baltimore most of my life. I guess you could say I'm a cultural activist who I've done a number of different things. I've been a photographer, a videographer, filmmaker, museum curator. I had a gallery in Washington for 25 years, and more recently I've been presenting jazz programs.
So Vernard, tell us about your organization and what you actually do.
I have a nonprofit that's been around for 43 years. It was actually founded in Washington, D.C., and it's called Cafe 3. And under that umbrella of that organization, we've done a number of different things. For instance, from 1976 through 2001, we had the Maya Gallery project, which was a downtown DC project that presented African American and African art and culture. It was a little different than a typical gallery in a sense that it was like a community center, and we had different kinds of activities that typically you wouldn't find in an art gallery, for instance. Had church in there. It was a theater space. It had, of course, artists exhibiting as well. We back in the late 70s, we introduced braiding with beads on the hair, that style, and it really caught on well. In fact, there was a movie, 10, that came out at the same time, which really blew it up, and we were able to do a lot. Earned a good amount of money, in fact, and enabled us to do things like publishing an arts newspaper and other kinds of projects. We've done oral history projects, etc. So that took up a significant period of time in terms of the history of the organization. And more recently, beginning in March of 2008, actually in Baltimore, we started a project called BMO Jazz, which was a project presenting jazz performances in different community settings. And we did it in about 14 different Baltimore neighborhoods where we presented in schools and churches, cafes, jazz lounges, museums, art galleries, places where people gather. And more recently, in the last 4 years, we've been programming in Washington, and the project there is called East River Jazz, with a focus on communities, presenting in communities in 2 wards of the city. The city is divided into 8 wards, and 2 of the wards are east of the Anacostia River, where a significant black population happens to live. And so we've been presenting events in those different wards, those 2 wards in different neighborhoods, senior wellness centers, libraries, art galleries. Again, we had the summer of 2013, we produced 7 events that were all performances featuring artists who had actually performed in the Left Bank Jazz Society series in the past. And they were all Baltimore-based artists as well. And they performed different programs during the course of the summer in a place called the Grand Venue in downtown Baltimore. One of the most popular programs was presenting Carlos Johnson, who was a Baltimore icon. And we had the largest audience to come to that event. Numbers of around 400 people showed up. And we had to find seats for people and all the rest of it. But Carlos was in top form.
As a matter of fact, I think we have a clip.
Yeah, we had a really wonderful time.
Well, Bernard, we're going to take a quick break right now.
Okay.
We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're here with Vernard Gray. So tell us a little bit more about your jazz events.
Well, we have a project this year called Celebrating Strayhorn. Strayhorn, Billy Strayhorn, was a composer who worked for nearly 30 years with Duke Ellington. And so some of the popular songs that you quite often attributed to Ellington are actually Strayhorn's compositions, like Take the A Train, Chelsea Bridge, Lush Life. Our series begins February 2nd at the Kennedy Center, Millennium Stage, at 6 o'clock. It follows with the following week with a conversation about why we should be celebrating Strayhorn. And in that series, in that particular event, his niece, and who's the president of the Strayhorn Foundation, the president of the Ellington Society, and Rusty Hassan, who is a jazz historian and on-air personality with WPFW Radio in Washington, will be having a conversation discussing the issues around why we should celebrate Strayhorn. And also on that afternoon, there will be a performance by a duet. Herman Burney is a bassist, and Reginald Sinjay is a trombonist who will perform some of Strayhorn's compositions. This will be taking place at the Francis Gregory Library in Southeast DC, and that's on February the 8th, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we move on to other events. All total, we have planned 25 events during the course of the year, and they will be in community venues like the library. They'll be at the Kennedy Center. There will be at jazz clubs in DC. One in particular is the Bohemian Caverns, for instance. They will be at outdoor parks. We are a partner of the DC Jazz Festival, and that takes place in June. This year is June 10th through the 16th, and we're partnering with them, and we'll be presenting at a community radio station. We're doing a program at a library again, and we're doing a whole festival on Sunday, the 14th of June, at an outdoor venue at St. Elizabeth's East Campus, it's called. And then the series goes on into the summer and into the fall, and it culminates on November the 29th, which is a Sunday, the Sunday after Thanksgiving, and that's the 100th anniversary of Mr. Strayhorn's birth. And that's the reason why we're doing this whole year. It's his centennial year, and we're planning a really big event that day, kind of a happy birthday, Mr. Strayhorn, program. So it should be a really nice series during the course of the year. And we're also going to invite other artists, not only performing artists, but poets or writers, people who write plays, etc., different creative folks who want to do something in honoring this man's memory, and it could be in any format. We're setting up online, we'll be setting up an application that allows them to post their events. so then people will know that they can come to, to see them.
Well, speaking of Billy Strayhorn, I think we have a little piece, so let's take a look. That was interesting. Speaking of you being a photographer, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Most of my work was accomplished as a freelance photographer from the mid-'60s through the mid-'70s. And so I have images of Dr. King, for instance, that I photographed 2 months before he was assassinated. He spoke at the Vernard Avenue Baptist Church in February of 1968, as an example. Also, further into that year, I traveled all over the country recruiting for VISTA and the Peace Corps, and I caught images of different people in different cities. The spring of that year, '68 was a significant year for me, and the spring of that year, after Dr. King was assassinated, they had the Poor People's Campaign that took place in Washington, and there was a tent city, as they call it, on a mall down near the reflection pool that's in front of the Lincoln Memorial, where they set up, and they had this. It was called Resurrection City, and I was one of a number of photographers who shot images from that series, from that particular series. And then there was a gathering that took place, like a rally, and people like Bill Cosby was there, for instance. We had Mrs. King, Ed Brooke, the senator from Massachusetts who just passed away. I have images of he and Mrs. King talking. Whitney Young and Roy Wilkins. Roy Wilkins was secretary of the NAACP, and Whitney Young was the head of the Urban League. They were sitting together, and I had images of them. Marlon Brando was there, and I have images of him as well. So that whole series, I have images that I shot. And then into further in, I traveled to Africa a few times, and once was to Liberia. The second time was to Uganda, and I was able to photograph the presidents of those countries and life that took place there. And of course, a significant amount of my work, which took place in Washington, D.C., and it covered jazz performances, street scenes, as well as different artists, etc. So. I guess you would say I was a documentary photographer in terms of how I approached the work. And in the early '70s, when portable video first showed up, it was Sony put together a reel-to-reel machine that was heavy as hell. The camera and the bag for carrying the recorder. But I was amongst these artists who were participating in that whole era of videography. We called ourselves the video freaks. And there were people in New York, and especially in New York and Washington, and we did a lot of collaboration during that time. And so that began my videography work, and I also did some film work.
Well, I know we have some of your work, so let's take a look at those. Wow, that was great.
Thank you.
Well, Vernard, we're going to have to take a little break right now, but I hope you can stay with us.
I'd be pleased to.
Great. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Struggling to breathe, to speak, to eat, forbidden to go to school or play with other kids, ridiculed, abused, abandoned. That's the tragic reality for the thousands of children born every year in the developing world with a cleft palate or cleft lip. Yet all it takes is a simple surgery to repair a cleft and change a child's life forever.
Welcome back. We are here with Vernard Gray. So tell us more. This is very exciting.
Well, you know, I did a series that I really am proud of at the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland African American culture and
That's
history.
a great museum.
Yeah, you know that place?
Yes.
Good. And at any rate, they were called First Fridays, and we did a series of 7 events that presented Maryland-based artists who historically had performed in the Left Bank Jazz Society series back in the 60s and 70s. And we had people like Arnold Sterling, we had Greg, who's a saxophonist, we had Greg Hotza, who's a organist, we had Sheila Ford, who's a vocalist, we had, trying to think of, Keith Kilgo. He was a drummer. He actually was a teenager when he performed with his dad, who was a pianist, Harry Kilgo. And then we had Carlos Johnson, who performed as well. Take a look at this.
You grew up in West Baltimore.
True. And it was the life expectancy of a kid in that area was 16 years old. So to evolve to anything productive was almost a non-issue. Either you would get shot or drugs or something would take you down. It was destined and geographically categorized for that purpose, to keep us in one negative environment. But I got all genres and ages. Ladies with the canes. Did you see ladies coming with the walking canes? They have been my following throughout the years. They were loyal fans and they love jazz. This was a wonderful afternoon for everyone, you know. And I thank you for having me.
And Carlos, I must say, as a promoter, this is one of the easiest jobs I ever had.
Well, that's beautiful.
It was just easy. I'm saying people would call and, you know, once we distributed the information, people just called, and so it didn't really take any effort to promote this.
Well, that's grace, glory to God.
Oh, that was great. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, it's important that people come. Number one, it's important that people support jazz music.
Definitely.
It's important. I can't say any more about that really, other than it's just simply important.
So now, Vernard, tell us why everyone should know what jazz really is.
Well, first off, jazz is the only music form created in the Americas that you could call that equates the music coming out of Europe, for instance. It's our classical music. So let's start there.
Okay.
Now, how did it get there? It got there because it started with the field songs and of the slaves working in the fields singing, and a lot of those songs were coded messages about escaping, etc. It moved on to spirituals in the church. Again, coded messages were delivered in that way. And then it moved on to the blues. But by that time, when the blues took place, it was in the early 1900s, slavery had ended, but there was still an expression of a people, blues. I got the blues,
Right.
okay? I got the blues dealing with this system, etc. And it translated and moved into jazz. And jazz initially was swing music, music that people danced to. So again, it related to our social movements along where we felt a lot more freer in the 20s and the 30s. And then in the 40s, in the mid-40s exactly, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, and people like that started something called bebop. We call it straight ahead jazz, but it's bebop. And it was significantly expressive, and allowing for longer solos by the musicians who really wanted to step out there and do stuff. And it's very much improvised. So they would take a standard melody, but then they would enhance on that standard melody and go off and play off. Sometimes they wouldn't, if they did a song 2 times straight in 2 different performances, it would actually be 2 different performances of the song. It wouldn't be the exact same thing. The melody would be the same, but the different singular performances by the artists would be different because they would take it this way or take it that way, etc. So jazz in that sense is important, and it's also an expression. It's an expression of a people, and I think that's really the most important things for people to understand. It's our significant cultural music genre of this country, as well as it's an expression of a people. In fact, I welcome people to join us celebrating Strayhorn this year, again beginning at the Kennedy Center on February the 2nd, followed on February the 8th at the Gregory Library in Southeast Washington. On the 15th, we're celebrating Strayhorn's civil rights movements, or support of the civil rights movement. And then following that, on the 28th, Baltimore's Dunbar Alumni Band will perform at a Wesley Church in Northwest DC.
And this is why we should go see this jazz event. Thank you, Vernard.
Thank you.
We are going to take a break, and we'll be right back.
Okay.
Welcome back. We are here with Vernard Gray. He is the jazz curator of an upcoming event of Billy Strayhorn. Please go see it. We've had a great day here with Vernard. Vernard, did you have anything else to say?
Yes, people can reach us online at www.eastriverjazz.net, or they can call us at 202-262-7571.
Great. It was a pleasure having you here, Vernard Gray. We will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Come celebrate Strayhorn.
Definitely. Have a great day.